Hi, morning everyone. Before I start, let me see if this works. Okay, so very pretty image. Thank you for all enjoying this.
Do you believe in the right moment? What if I told you there is a place in that moment? A place where what if becomes what is. Where tradition and innovation seamlessly work together. Where technology can create entire markets. Southeast Asia is in the advent of a breakthrough. A new wave that is set to change the world as we know it. But how exactly do we amplify this wave? Well, it starts by looking inwards and finding visionaries, innovators who dare to make a difference. And who are these market creators? And what do they hope to see for the future?
Tôi thấy một tương lai nơi mọi lao động phổ thông đều được tiếp cận với những giải pháp tài chính số nhân văn.
Di mana semua individu, dimanapun lokasinya, mendapatkan akses yang sama pada barang dan kebutuhan pokok dengan harga yang terjangkau.
A world for homes that are smart, connected, and green.
Masyarakat di mana setiap orang memiliki akses ke pendidikan yang lebih baik.
Saya melihat satu masa depan di mana petani dan seluruh komunitasnya bisa mendapatkan segala apa adanya dalam hanya satu klik.
Where we can keep our streets clean and our air fresh.
Pasar di mana ada transparansi di berbagai bisnis.
See a world where age does not limit one's potential.
So what do all these uncommon companies with uncommon goals have in common? The shared mission to uplift the lives of the next billion.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. And welcome, and thank you for joining me at the Emergence 2025 conference. My name is Charles Wong. Before I start, can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you in the audience in the last 5-10 years have been to Southeast Asia? Can you please raise your hands? Wonderful. Okay, I feel very enthused at the moment. So, by background, my name is Charles. I am the co-founder of TMBura, joined by my partner, Vic, who is in the audience today. For those of you who are wondering, TNB, as the initials, stands for the next billion. It often gets asked, is that next $1 billion, guys, isn't that a bit on your nose? No, that's the next billion users. And where will that come about from? It's from the emerging markets, of which 600 million of those are sitting in Southeast Asia today. In short, and I'll keep this part fairly brief, I'm happy to have a chat with many of you after this today. We are a thesis-driven Series A venture capital investor, investing all across Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and of course markets like Singapore, where our headquarters are based. We're privileged today to be now investing out of our third fund, backed by many global, highly renowned investors around the world. I'll share some more of that a bit later. And it's my pleasure today to share with you guys a little bit of that journey. In terms of the team, we are a team of, let me just switch to a different mic because I like to walk around a bit. We're a team of 20. Based across and on the ground in every single one of the markets that we operate. The team are comprised of experienced investment professionals who work together for the greater part of a decade. Every single one of us has grown, built, and exited businesses in our regions in the past. In addition to being top-down, highly networked across the region, we are also very much building capabilities that help our portfolio companies. So you'll see across the team, from Glenn, who runs exits for us, Joe, who runs our investments and research team, to David, who runs value creation, each of these capabilities forms a fundamental part of how we think about the world. In building up our organization, we build for the future. We're now onto our third fund, as I mentioned, backed by global DFIs, sovereign funds, fund of funds. And I think for many of you, if the objective today of myself is just onefold, is to get more of you to look at Southeast Asia as an opportunity for investment in the coming decade. So, why Southeast Asia? I enjoy this a lot because I think for many of you in the crowd, it seems you've been there, visited there, hopefully looked at investing there in the past. So a little bit about myself and my journey. So I started my career here in Sydney, Australia, as a management consultant, working with Booz Allen and Hamilton back when it was called that. From that, I helped develop Booz's first private equity business called Booz Capital, following which I went to Harvard in the US, where I had classmates and colleagues who came back to Southeast Asia to form the biggest billion-dollar companies that many of you would have used in your trips there, such as Grab and Gojek. My first fulcrum moment of where to invest as a venture capitalist came following my MBA, where I decided to go to the Wild West of China. This is back in 2012. And I felt at that point the undeniable need to be one of the biggest markets that was encroaching and developing and changing the shape of the world. It was true. So that was China back then. I worked there for about 5 years. I even ran one of the larger tech businesses there called Groupon. And then following that, met my co-founder, Vic. Following that, I decided the next fulcrum moment was Southeast Asia. So I will not, and you'll, for those of you who know me in the crowd, I don't like to read from slides, so let me give you the highlights. Southeast Asia is a population, this is now slightly out of date, of over 660 million people. The ages are inverted. Rather, so instead of Australia, where you'll have over 50 to 60% above the age of 35 in an aging population, it's the opposite here in Southeast Asia. Number two, we're one of the most digitally connected markets in the world. And three, mass adoption of technology is just native. So what makes for Southeast Asia, in addition to these great stats, different, and why is it different now than it was in the past? And I think that's useful just to go past the surface. Three primary things. The first is 660 million people, 140 million of which will be added to the consumer population within this decade. That's 140 million people. All of which, to Steve's point earlier, are completely mobile first and AI native. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old kid. They no longer use Google. None of their friends, none of their cousins, my relatives in all the various markets that I live, none of them are using this anymore. It's completely different. The usage of technology is already shaping, and much like China with credit cards, if you ever go to China, you won't find one. We will leapfrog that in our side of the world. Number two, the market of Southeast Asia used to be one of many that was bundled together within the Asia bucket of allocators. The eyes of the world are, and increasingly will be, on Southeast Asia. Just looking at allocation itself, Southeast Asia consistently grows at about 10 to 12% CAGR in terms of the AUM pool growing. And unlike other developed markets, but much like other developing markets, the largest proportion, the majority of this, is in venture capital. And why is that? It's because it's not the legacy businesses that will build the future of Southeast Asia, but the new ones that are there. And the third, and perhaps the most interesting point to me about why Southeast Asia is so relevant today, and the consumers are so relevant today, is because it's one of the most amazing places where you can do good and make great capital returns at the same time. Just to be very clear, we're not an impact fund. No big I in our name or anything like that. But we find that every investment that we make affects lives of those next billion. This is just a quick snapshot of the maturity of the ecosystem. Already to date, we have over 39 unicorns printed in the last 10 years, of which several have already gone to IPO. There are 19 companies, including some of our own portfolio companies, that have announced that they will IPO in one of the local exchanges, or even Australia or in the US, in the next 3 years, waiting for the gates of the IPO market to open, as I'm sure many of you guys are here as well. And the examples on the right-hand side just give you some flavor of the scale of the businesses that we can build in a market that has 600-odd million people. So let me spend a couple minutes now on how we invest. And I'll try and, to many of you who have invested in venture capital in the past, draw a stark comparison with how venture is historically done. I think that's quite important because as I started this whole spiel so far, we are a thematic-backed, thematic-driven Series A investor. The way in which we invest, I can characterize into 2 dimensions, and maybe to make it simple. Most VCs out there take out an approach which is highly spray and pray, very, very diversified portfolio, 50 to 100 portfolio companies per fund. We think that's the wrong way to approach it. We think conviction is key in a market where you have a few but huge outlying performers. In that market, you want to be highly convicted to an investment, make a smaller number of these, but have a higher proportion of investment, ownership stake in each. So when they exit, you return the fund spades and spades over. So on that dimension, we are a high conviction fund. On the second dimension, most other VCs are extremely inbound. Not to say that that's bad at a seed level or an angel level, but as a Series A investor, being inbound is fraught with bias. Today you meet a marketing technology company, a financial services company, a logistics company, one in Indonesia, one in Vietnam. How can you be an expert in all of these at exactly the same time the moment the company comes to you? So we find, and we have only ever prosecuted deals this way, it's important to go outbound, to look at a theme, evaluate that, and to identify the companies that we want to invest into. As usual, we take a 4-step process. There's a procedure to this. It starts with something which we as TNB Aura have developed with the top universities, originally in Singapore, but now across all of Southeast Asia. In addition to obviously being guest lecturers, we help support and develop the curriculum of the universities in Southeast Asia for entrepreneurship. We think that's really important to not use Amazon, Spotify, things like that, even Singapore Airlines of old. It needs to be based today on new examples. And so in order to do that, we developed what is now the most robust, extensive data set of unicorn and near unicorn businesses in all of China, India, and Southeast Asia, probably in the world. That data set is a time series over the last 15 years, and we use that to look at what has happened first in other markets so that we can identify what should happen next in Southeast Asia. The way in which we use that data is then with a combination of demographics, socioeconomics rather, and infrastructure level meters to evaluate, all right, if it's this large in China, this large in India, roughly how large should it be in Indonesia as a theme? The goal is not to copy and paste. Just want to make that exceptionally clear. As made point by this third here, where we develop deep dive research. We have a dedicated research team based out of the Philippines with a team also in Singapore, working together on over 40 different industries and sectors. I'm almost 100% sure if any of you are looking at a particular industry and sector, you can come chat to us. We'll very happily share with you our research, our sprint in a particular area. The goal of this research is to take those thematics that we see in other parts of the world and determine what is the nuance, what is the relevance to Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, as I mentioned. The final step in our whole process here is to understand where to invest, of course. But we don't do it by waiting for a company to come to us. As I'll give you an example over Leaf, we always go outbound, and the goal is for us to canvas the market. When we find a theme we like, we understand a sector that we want to invest into, and a particular business model that we think is relevant, we only back the best. It's why we're well known, and for many of our investors, their only allocation to covering Southeast Asia. I'll give you one example, and I'll do this briefly. It's far too small to see the specifics on the page. But the goal of each of our research tasks is to understand the scale and size of a market, rapidly from an industry level, go down to the sectors. As an example here, where we invested into the largest private EV charging business, not just in Singapore, not just in 1 or 2 markets, but in all of Southeast Asia, is to then go and say, what are the sectors that can make money? A lot of discussion on Tesla earlier this morning, 4-wheeler EVs. There are 6 areas and sectors to invest within EV. One of those is 4-wheelers. It won't be in Southeast Asia. Those markets, far too large. Even at VinFast, the first opening round, hundreds and hundreds of $1 million. It won't be for us. 2-wheelers, very interesting. We've invested into one of the largest in Southeast Asia. And one of the most interesting ones is EV charging. To give you a quick anecdote here, across all of Southeast Asia by 2035, almost every single country has made a commitment to ban the sales of new ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. In Singapore, it's by the end of this decade. Combined with the fact that there are typically restrictions for how long you can drive a car on the road, by 2040, you've got a good chance that almost every car, if not every other car, will be an EV vehicle on the road in Southeast Asia. So this is a big theme. Now the question is, right here, what is the right business model to adopt in doing this? Again, the data is out there. We look at all the precedent models in more developed markets. It's one of the privileges of being in Southeast Asia, where we don't need to crystal ball in isolation. We have the rest of the world to look at. And you can see that there are several business models that are applied around the world. disproportionately the best ones are in this model that we call the end-to-end model, where you build your own infrastructure, AC, DC chargers, you take a yield off that. If the utilization rates are above 12 to 15%, you're breaking even and making amazing IRR on your equity. We then size the market, and the most important part here, of course, is to see who else is out there. Again, being outbound, we met almost 20 players, almost every single private player out there, before we understood that there was one who was never answering our calls, who had never met another investor, who was profitable, access to debt, didn't need any capital. That was the Business Charge Plus. We showed enough value with this research, with our compelling team, value creation activities, such that they chose only us to be the investor in their Series A. They'll raise another round at the end of this year. If any of you like this kind of space, come and chat to us. We're happy to introduce you to the founders. All right. Very briefly, how much time do I have, by the way? 1 minute. I'll be very quick. This data allows us to do so many more things than just figure out, here's a theme, here's a company. It allows us to also predict when shifts occur. Right, left-hand side here is on the big industries out of China. So this is based on the data set I said earlier. E-commerce comes first, fintech next to pay for those goods, logistics to move those goods around. Most of you may have a heuristic, a gut feel that this is where it is. You probably haven't seen this data before. On the right, we can break that out and understand within each individual sector, what are the themes that work. In short, this insight, which was that e-commerce in tier 1 cities in China, the moment 2017 hit, and you had a certain amount of adoption of e-commerce in the major cities, it moved. It shifted to being social e-commerce in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. By knowing that, we identified first, this thematic, we canvassed the market, we identified one player in Indonesia. Today, by a factor of 10, roughly about $500 million valuation today. We entered at a $40 million valuation about 3.5 years ago. Subsequently, 1 year from that, it became a $300 million valuation round led by New Enterprise Associates from the US. At that point, when we identified it, the founder himself didn't realize what he was sitting on. He didn't realize that he had the best unit economics in the market. All right, let me jump ahead. So in terms of the team and our approach, that's a little bit about us. In terms of the style in which we invest, let me just share, we've now made 23 what we call core investments in the region, covering e-commerce, logistics, healthcare, education, and the like. Because of our 40 sprints, we know exactly where we're going next. And as you can see for some of the purple tags here, if you like, the holy grail of ventures to find companies that are positioned in one company returns the entire fund. We've done this a few times, generated exits of some of these. Happy to chat about that as well. And maybe to end off, left-hand side, a little bit of benchmarking. We are audited by KPMG, so we always provide this to groups like Preqin, Cambridge, to make sure that we're always keeping track of our peer set. Thankfully, we're always happy to be in the top quartile, and for our most recent Fund 2, and as I mentioned, we're on to our third flagship fund now. In Fund 2, it looks like we're one of the top 3 funds in Asia, including China and India. We work closely with the government, and maybe I'll end on this. Hopefully today, if there's nothing else that it's that I've piqued your interest in looking at Southeast Asia as a market, that I've piqued your interest in a way that venture is done, can be done maybe, the way that we do it, that's very different from the way that the market does so. Our investors include the Norwegian sovereign DFI, Khazanah, which is our sovereign fund of Malaysia, FMO, the Dutch Development Bank of Japan, and many, many others, including Fund of Funds. I myself, again, as I said at the beginning, came from here, Australia. I love this market. I want to see it doing more with Southeast Asia. I always am struck with how many of the largest institutions have a very insular view of the world. But as I'm told by Steve, I think the audience today, hopefully, and from the show of hands earlier, I can tell there's a level of engagement. So my name's Charles, as I mentioned. My partner is Vignesh. Our email address is super easy, tnbaura.com. Take that now, take a photo, contact us, grab us after this. We would love to have a chat. So thank you very much, everyone.